Hello, all. It is Brother Telepathy. I'm Micah. This is my brother Graham. We're coming at you with another video today. We've got 2025 NFL draft team needs. So each team we're going to go through and talk about what we think in our own mind, my opinion and Graham's opinion on what their biggest draft needs are. Some of the stuff we agreed on, some of the stuff we differed on. But Graham, you got any thoughts before we get straight into it?
No, pretty straightforward. Biggest needs for every team. May throw in a couple honorable mentions potentially, but yeah, biggest need. So yeah, let's get into it.
Cool. We'll see where it takes us. But I'm going to start us off with the Cardinals here.
Yeah,
And I promise I didn't do this for every single one. But defense is pretty apparent in Arizona there in the desert. With Jonathan Gannon, I just feel like they need more talent. I know linebacker is a spot that I was tempted to put here. Their linebacking core is pretty weak. They could just, anywhere that you can get top-end talent, I think they need to take advantage of. Corner, as Graham mentioned, is also a need. But Graham, I'll let you touch on that a little bit.
yeah. I definitely wanted to put edge rusher in particular, but they did re-sign Baron Browning, which we talked about. They did sign Josh Sweat. They got Calais Campbell, which obviously he's an older guy, but maybe still has a little bit of juice potentially. Jury's still kind of out on Darius Robinson, their draft pick from last year. Maybe he ends up panning out. So I didn't go there. Went with corner for them. So, Sean Murphy Bunting is on the roster. They've got Max Melton. They've got Garrett Williams. So I think they could stand to improve their secondary. I think, a guy like Will Johnson could potentially go in that 16-ish range, and I think this would be a good landing spot for him. So ultimately, I'm thinking corner if I had to pick one major need, I would say.
Yeah, it's a solid room, but I don't think any of those guys necessarily scare you away from taking corner there. If someone like Will Johnson was there, I think it's a good fit right there. And I'm going to
Yeah.
keep the corner trend going actually with the Falcons here. And maybe if I pulled up the roster, it would do me some favors here. I know we kind of
Yeah.
went through it earlier, but
Shout out to ourlads.com. They do a good job with showing the depth chart and stuff like that for every team. So shout out to you guys. I'm looking at that right now as we're going through. Um, But yeah, I think corner could I think defense, honestly, for them too. I know you mentioned defense for the Cardinals, but I think defense makes sense for the Falcons. Um, in a way, I almost wanted to put receiver actually, kind of going against that because you got Drake London. I think they could stand against another receiver, but ultimately, I think defense would get them more over the hump in terms of potentially competing for that division because you still have a good number of weapons on that offensive side of the ball. So for me, I went edge. Sorry to kind of overtake your spot here while you're looking up the roster, but
no, I was.
but yeah, I think edge ultimately would help kind of put them over the hump. I think they were bottom 2 or 3 in total sacks last year. So I definitely think some edge rushing juice would be good for them. And obviously, this is a super deep edge class. So
Yeah, no, I appreciate you taking over while I was looking up the roster here, just making sure I had my T's crossed and my I's dotted. But yeah, edge definitely a need, and you're right on the sack numbers. Pretty pitiful for the past multiple years, actually, not even just last year. But
yeah, good point. Yeah,
we'll
sure.
we'll see what that looks like. But I mean, look at the corner room. I mean, AJ Terrell is your guy, obviously, and then after that, you have Mike Hughes and Keith Taylor Jr. as your
Mike
corners.
Hughes. I forgot they re-signed Mike Hughes. Yeah.
Viking legend. Yeah, no, it's and then Clark Phillips, I believe he was a fifth rounder last year. He had some. I know early in the process he had some hype early, like first round hype. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but not someone. He's like 5'7", so not someone that you necessarily trust in the secondary there. But yeah, I think corner's a huge need. Just looking at their roster on paper, I don't think it's near good enough, and certainly not if you don't have a pass rush to help them out. So.
Fair enough. Yeah, this is pretty straightforward too, I think, for the Ravens. I think for the Ravens too, like this is a team that we've talked about a few times where there aren't a ton of holes, but I would say if there is a kind of one, I think I mentioned guard potentially in our last mock draft video, but let's just keep improving the pass rush, and I think particularly for me, edge on the outside I think would make the most sense. Ultimately went with edge for them to address in the draft because again, citing the deep class too, I think there's a lot of guys they could get to be high-level contributors for them anywhere in the draft.
Yeah, and I agree with you there on the pass rush. I think they have some decent pass rush from their interior of their D-line with Matabike and Travis Jones, I believe, out of UConn, if I got that right. Either way, on the perimeter, you have Kyle Van Noy, who's like ancient at this point in his career,
Right.
and then question marks everywhere else. So
Yeah.
it's definitely a team that definitely needs some pass rush help, and we obviously agreed on that facet. And then Buffalo Bills, I went with corner. They obviously signed
You mean re-signed? We did this last time.
I know. They
Oh
re-signed
crap!
the corner. You know who I'm talking about. They re-signed the corner
We
to
can't do it
multiple.
2 videos in a row with the same guy.
I know, I know.
Dang it.
I want to say Burchard, but that is not
It's
right.
not. It's Christian Benford.
Christian Benford. I got the letter right. Either way, corner is a huge need for them. You could go multiple ways here as well, but I think corner is a pretty glaring need. I could have just went secondary in general because I don't know if I trust. I mean, Taron Johnson's fine, but I don't know if I trust anybody in the safety room either. Damar Hamlin doing his thing, so
I don't say,
I don't really
Taylor
love any of
Rapp,
it.
doesn't move you too much, I think, either. Yeah, I'm with you. I think for edge, they obviously re-signed Greg Rousseau. That was a big deal for them. And then aside from that, the other guy they signed in free agency was Joey Bosa, a guy who I think could still maybe add a little bit of value, but ultimately I think you'd like to get some more juice and some more youth on the other end of the side, other side, I should say, to Greg Rousseau to pair up on that D line. And again, this is another team that is really good, and I think when you're a really good team, you look to build up your trenches still, make that even more of a strength. So, yeah, ultimately, again, not a ton of holes at this point for the Bills. I think, you could probably say receiver too, maybe. I don't know how I know you and I are not huge on Keon Coleman, so maybe you could look to potentially fill that. They did re-sign Khalil Shakir, so and they signed Josh Palmer, which is another move that we liked as well. So probably not receiver, but yeah, ultimately edge, I think.
Definitely a thought there with the receiver room. Khalil Shakir is like one of my favorite players in the NFL. So
I will add too, a potential need will be if James Cook doesn't re-sign for whatever reason, running back will end up being somewhat of a need too, I think. So that'll be something we'll monitor, but potential, I guess, need for them. So.
yeah, I like Ray Davis as a back. I liked him out of Kentucky last year, but we'll see what that ends up looking like. Carolina Panthers here. I did it again. I said I wasn't gonna do it. I did it again. I lied to the viewers. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, defense is terrible. Literally one of the worst units ever. Which will there's another unit we'll come across who's similar to this. But yeah, Carolina Panthers defense is one of the worst units ever last year as far as points allowed.
Like
so,
actually.
like yeah, no, statistically
Like
one of the worst ever.
historically.
Yeah, historically
right.
awful defense. I think maybe the most points allowed in a season. Anyways, yeah, defense. It's not. It's let's not overthink this. I think at 8 they go defense, and obviously in free agency that was the thought process too.
Yeah, again, another honorable mention, maybe receiver, but we're going with biggest needs. We're going to say defense. And I did go particular edge. Just looking at their edge rushing unit, Jadeveon Clowney was their best edge rusher last year. So I think you need some more than just Derek Brown. They did sign Jashawn Wharton from Kansas City. So interior D-line would have been definitely in contention for me on this one. But I think with that signing, I think edge becomes the more glaring need. So that's why I ultimately went there.
Yeah, certainly can't disagree with you there. But we do agree here with the offensive line, despite all the moves they've made, and I know you're going to feel the same way about this.
Right.
And it's a constant theme in kind of the way we would want to build our teams if Graham and I were GMs is let's protect the asset. And I know it'll come up again, and I'll probably say that same phrase, but regardless of the moves they've made, which I'm not entirely sold on, I get a little weary whenever we throw in a bunch of pieces together, especially if Kansas City, a team who desperately needs offensive line, is willing to come off of Joe Thuney. That should say a lot. If they're a team that needs offensive line and they give up their best offensive lineman, that doesn't bode very well for Joe Thuney, in my opinion, at 32, 33 years old. But offensive line, let's protect Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I think this is the biggest thing. I don't know if, again, you do draft for immediate needs, but I think at the same time, you definitely can look to add depth. So we're not necessarily saying they take an O lineman at 10 overall. Maybe they do. But I think just at some point in the draft, this is still one of their biggest needs, just looking at it from like an age perspective and things like that. So I agree with you. We've talked about it before. You can't ever have too many offensive linemen. You can't have too many pass rushers or just D linemen in general. So, yeah, it kind of goes with our general philosophy on this one. So I'm still with you in the same boat on this one here.
I'm definitely glad you brought up that point about that might not be the pick that they should draft at because the Bears pick at 10, obviously, and I don't think they go offensive line at 10, although it's definitely in contention.
Sure.
The value might not line up for that pick. So
Right.
while offensive line is probably their biggest need to us, at 10 it might not make sense based on however their board looks. I mean, obviously I can't speak to that.
Right. Well, and that's the thing too, is I think maybe we should have clarified this before, but I think this is just overall draft. I mean, you think about it, we get really caught up in the first round, and that makes sense because those are your kind of your staple players for the most part. But teams are built through the middle rounds of the draft, and so we're looking at the entire draft as a whole. We need to address these positions at some point during the draft. Again, doesn't necessarily mean it has to be done with your first or second pick or anything like that. But it like you mentioned, the value needs to line up. But at some point, we need to address these positions we're talking about. So yeah, good clarification there.
Yeah.
I, Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, we're stealing each other's thunder. Cincinnati Bengals. We both went edge here. With Trey Hendrickson coming, or is he coming back or not? I don't remember.
Well, they haven't made a decision on him. Sam Hubbard did retire too, so
That's right. Okay.
there's that.
That's what I was thinking of. We're recording it late at night, so my brain's a little scattered. But yeah, but anyways, regardless, even if they retain Hendrickson, which it sounds like is probably going to be the case, edge rusher and pass. I guess I put edge, but not necessarily pass rush. I mean, pass rush is, like Graham just mentioned, is something that we could always, your team could always need. But Micah Williams has been one of my favorite picks for this spot. Who's obviously not like a super polished pass rusher at this stage in his career. He's definitely more of a run stopper, but I think someone opposite of Hendrickson to be able to kind of hold down their end would bode well for the team.
I think that'd be a great pick for a reason you just brought up. You got Trey Hendrickson as kind of your guy to go get the quarterback, and then you've got Michael Williams being helping in the run stopping department. I think he's still got some upside as a pass rusher. He wasn't asked to do that a ton at Georgia, so I think there's some opportunity for him there. But yeah, I mean it's defense. You can go linebacker, you can go interior D line, you can go edge. I think we just both landed on edge, especially if Trey Hendrickson does get traded or something like that. That becomes a glaring need.
Yeah.
So I think that's why we went there ultimately. On to the Browns. Yeah, I'm interested to see that we actually lined up on this one. So I think receiver is going to be the biggest need for them. I think offensive line is definitely in contention. That offensive line unit is not great. And so I think that's definitely another area they should look to improve. Defense is in a pretty good spot, though. I know you and I like Abdul Carter at number 2 overall. But again, I think throughout the draft, they need to address wide receiver. You've got Jerry Jeudy. I'm trying to think of who even else. Cedric Tillman's still on the roster.
Yeah,
you don't
Cedric
have a ton
Tillman.
of yeah. I mean, you don't have a ton of juice in that receiver room. If Jerry Judy's like your wide receiver 1, and he did perform a couple of times last year, but I think you'd like to find some more playmakers.
Yeah, and I think quarterback could have been an easy pick here too, as with
Yeah.
most of these teams, the top end of the draft in particular don't have a quarterback, so that's automatically a need. But that's not fun. So we're gonna go with more of a overall team need as opposed to the one position of quarterback. So yeah, I agree with you though. Receiver, Cedric Tillman was encouraging last year through stretches, but I don't know if he's enough to again make you not want to take receiver at some point. Jerry Jeudy is he fine as your wide receiver 1? Probably not. He's a wide receiver 2.
So good wide receiver too, but
Yeah, strong wide receiver. But and you also brought up a good point about the offensive line. Just looking at the names, Joel Batonio in that left guard spot, who's ancient, Wyatt Teller, who's ancient, and Jack Conklin, who's ancient. So you have 3 30-plus-year-old guys. I have no idea how old Ethan Pochich is, but anyways, it's an older, aging offensive line, and with the athletic defensive lines that we see in the NFL today, improving that unit would also be definitely a spot that you could go. But we both ultimately went receiver.
I think quarterback is a good point to bring up too, though, because I think they're certainly a position where right now it's Kenny Pickett, because Deshaun Watson's probably not playing, and you don't want him to be your guy either way. They have to pretty much address quarterback through the draft because they don't have any money to spend in free agency, which the main free agency period has kind of already died down. But I think you're looking at aging vet or rookies, so I think that's a fair argument for quarterback too.
Yeah, definitely. And then moving on to the Dallas Cowboys, I've said this one multiple times. I mean, I feel like every time we do a mock draft, I come up with the same points if I'm picking for Dallas.
Yeah.
We need help outside of CeeDee Lamb. I'm a big Dak fan. I think Dak is actually a really strong quarterback in the NFL. He's becoming underrated at this point to me. Let's get him some help. Let's get CeeDee Lamb some help on the outside. Or if this could mean running back, as you mentioned, losing Rico Dowdle, and I don't know if you trust the newly signed Javonte Williams, but I would feel more comfortable if we got a strong tight end or a strong receiver out there to help out.
Yeah, I like your distinction of just general skill position, just juice somewhere. I think wide receiver 2 has obviously been a big point of where they want to address in the draft, and that's been a lot of around the mocks for like number 12 for them in the draft. I think Matthew Golden, Tech McMillan is a popular pick for them, so I could definitely see that too. I think edge rusher potentially for them as well. I think again there are a few different holes. I'll be curious to see what Dallas does this year. To be honest with you, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I could certainly see them finishing, third or depending on how the Giants do in that division, third or fourth maybe, depending on what happens. So it'll be an interesting year for them for sure.
Yeah, they always have their weird draft philosophies and way they kind of approach things. That's kind of how Jerry operates in his world. So, yeah, we'll definitely see how that goes. Denver Broncos, kind of in tune with what we did in the last pick, but we flopped a little bit. I went running back. Obviously, Javonte Williams, as we previously mentioned, has departed. Jaleel McLaughlin is looking like the lead guy in that backfield, and that's not enough for me. Let's help out Bo Nix. I think the additions they made in the tight end receiving room with Evan Ingram and Noah Fant, I think that keeps you afloat enough to where it doesn't feel as much of an immediate need as running back, but you have some different thoughts, obviously.
Yeah. For me, looking at receiver, nobody really moves me a ton. I like Cortland Sutton a lot. I've actually liked him for a while, but he is getting older. They signed Trent Sherfield, again, another good like wide receiver 3 type of guy for them. Marvin Mims has a little bit of promise. Troy Franklin has a little bit of promise. But again, nobody really moves me that much. I think getting another dynamic playmaker for Sean Payton would make a ton of sense. I'm going to agree with you, though, too. Running back, definitely a position that needs to be addressed at some point in the draft. And it is a deep running back class. So I think actually I maybe would flip this one to running back, having to do it over. But I still think receiver is a need for them. Obviously, their defense is top-notch. Their offensive line is top-notch. They got their quarterback. So let's just get somebody to help Bo Nix out a little further, like you already alluded to.
Yeah, we can just chalk this one up to skill position as well. I'll let you start with here at the Lions.
Yeah, for me, you got Aiden Hutchinson obviously as your main edge rusher. I think you could definitely get somebody on the other side as kind of your weak edge rusher, or your weak side edge rusher, I should say, to pair with Aiden Hutchinson. Overall, I think defense would be the wise move here. They've kind of lacked a little bit of talent on their defensive line, their front seven in particular, for a little bit now. So, again, referencing the deep edge class, I think it would just make the most sense to address edge for them. But what are your thoughts on that? Do you agree with that, honestly?
Yeah, definitely agree with you. I think their interior D-line was a consideration given the health of, I guess, their entire front seven, as you've already mentioned. Their health is the biggest problem. So if they're healthy, I think it's a fine unit. They have some strong rotational pieces, and then like Aleem McNeil in the interior defensive line. They also brought in the guy from Cincinnati last year. I also can't remember his name, which is on brand. Regardless, I think getting Aiden Hutchinson some assistance out there would bode well for the team. Would bode well for the team overall. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, well, why don't you go ahead and start with the Packers with receiver on this one? Because I actually would disagree with this one personally, which is kind of a hot take. I feel like a lot of the time, people talking about the Packers say that what you're about to say, but I'm going to actually disagree a little bit. So you go ahead first.
Yeah, well, I'll be looking forward to hearing what you have to say as well. Opposite sides of the ball here, corner and receiver. I went wide receiver 1 specifically, and given where they're selecting the draft, is it possible? I don't know. Can you get a wide receiver 1 later in the draft? It's unlikely, but I think what we're looking for here is health and frame. I think that you need to have like Elick Edelman here for me. Maybe like as a second round guy, if you were to fall like late second, would be a awesome fit. I think like someone who can separate for that size, like the X frame. But I think you need somebody who's a wide receiver 1. They have so many. They have the Romeo Dobbs and Christian Watson, who they took in the same draft class in 2022. The health is a question for both of them. The consistency is a question for both of them. We need someone more secure. And is it Tucker Kraft at tight end? Maybe. Is it the other cat they have at tight end? Probably not. We'll see what happens. Luke Musgrave. All their weapons are just kind of mad at me. Like, are they good enough to keep you afloat? Absolutely. Can Jordan Love make them work? Absolutely. But if we get him a bona fide guy, I'd like to see what that team does.
Yeah, I could see that for sure. And again, it's a bit of a hot take because I do see the argument. But for me, I kind of actually like the way their receiver room is built to a degree. It's kind of like there's not one main guy that kind of gets doubled or whatever. You kind of have to look at all their threats essentially, and basically all their guys could run all the routes at all the different spots. And so I kind of like that versatility in the room. But with that being said, again, I think we've seen what bona fide wide receiver ones have done for young quarterbacks over the years. So I think that definitely makes sense. But to me, I like Dontavian Wicks. He's a young guy. Obviously, I like Jaden Reed, him coming out of Michigan State a couple years ago. You mentioned the injury concerns with Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs. I definitely see that too. But I think if you do have all those guys healthy, I actually kind of like that receiver room personally. So that's why I ultimately didn't go there. But again, I do see the argument there. For me, I went corner, as aforementioned here. And so I like the Nate Hobbs signing. We talked about that in our free agency recap video. I like that one. Obviously, I have Xavier McGinney at safety there for them. So that's obviously a solidified spot. But, after that, Jair Alexander is getting older. They were talking about potentially cutting him or trading him. So I think definitely could look to improve their corner room. And then aside from that, again, nobody else really that impressive on my end of things from like a corner standpoint. They let go of what was his name? The guy from Georgia a couple years ago they drafted in the first round.
The fast guy, Stokes.
Yes, Eric Stokes.
Eric Stokes,
they recently let him walk as well. So again, I think corner is definitely a need for them, and I think a spot that corner could go at the end of the first round at pick 23 when they're picking. So for me, it really just boils down to that's to me one of the biggest glaring needs for them. And again, you've got some older guys there right now, including the addition of Nate Hobbs. So that's kind of where I landed on this one for the Packers.
Yeah, and Graham, I'll let you actually start with this one since we agreed as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is easy. I mean, this is probably the most disappointing offensive line going into the year, which is tough to think through if you're a Texans fan when you got C.J. Stroud and you got the rest of the roster, because I feel like the rest of the roster is pretty well built at this point for the most part. I think they could look to make a few moves on defense, but overall, I think you're pretty happy with where things are at on the roster, except for the massive gaping hole at offensive line. I don't like any of the moves they made in free agency, the departures that they made, and the acquisitions. I don't like anything they've really done in free agency at the offensive line position. So, and I think at this point, you've got really at least 3 or 4 spots that you have to find starters at, and that's just not going to be a good situation for them going forward, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, they brought in Cam Robinson to play tackle. Obviously, the trade with Ed Ingram with the Vikings, so those guys look like they're going to be starters. And if those guys are starters, and the Vikings are willingly letting them go, both of them, ironically, to go play for the Texans, that should say a lot. Those were our 2 worst offensive linemen last year. I guess Cam Robinson played fine, but I don't necessarily trust him moving forward to play that left tackle spot. But yeah, offensive line is just abysmal for this team. And kind of the opposite of what the Bears did, where they accumulated a ton of players at once, which makes me feel nervous. The Texans did the inverse, and they were like, let's just fire sale our entire offensive line and cut everybody and restart with a new 5, and they all suck. So it's this is the complete inverse of what the Bears had done.
It's just weird when you've got your franchise quarterback back there, and it seems like they almost willingly got worse at arguably the most important position on the offensive side of the ball, aside from quarterback, obviously. So it's just it was a weird strategy. It really means they must have really wanted to turn around that room, like a philosophy standpoint, like we talked about last time. So, definitely something they're going to have to address multiple times in the draft, in my opinion. Next up was the Colts. This is kind of an interesting spot, because I think there are a few different needs for the Colts. Ultimately, I think we landed on, obviously, tight end being one for them, where they just really don't have anybody at tight end. I think you can find viable spots at pretty much most of their other positions at this point here, whereas tight end is, again, something that desperately needs to be addressed, where you've got Jelani Woods, Drew Ogletree. I don't think either of those guys move you. You are in position to maybe get a Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren, so I think that could maybe be an interesting spot for them. That's been mocked a few different times here. I think for me, it just boiled down to that. I think a sneaky need for them could be interior offensive line. Obviously, let Will Fries go, so maybe somebody at that right guard spot could be a good addition for them too. But in terms of biggest need, we'll go with tight end ultimately for them.
Yeah, and I've been somebody who said even in the draft process, I don't love tight end to them early. I mean, that's not like I think they're 14 when they pick. I don't love. I
Yeah,
don't think I've
14.
mocked. I don't think I've mocked tight end to them once. Just because I don't love the idea of them picking that. I'd rather them go get a later guy. But
Sure.
bunch of other spots you've mentioned. Interior offensive line definitely a possible option there with obviously Will Fry's leaving the Vikings. Then Quentin Nelson has been like steadily declining the past couple of years. He kind of peaked after that first little 3 to 4 year stretch he had. So definitely a place you could upgrade potentially. But tight end is just the room is so bad that I couldn't ignore
Right.
throwing out a name. So or throwing
That's
out
where I
the
landed too.
position.
Yeah, exactly. It was just the matter of there are other needs, but this is like the clear, obvious, like we don't have anybody barely viable at that spot
Right.
at this point. So,
Like you might not even have a tight end two starting as your tight end one. Like you might not even have somebody
no,
who's a
right. Like you've
quality
got,
second option being your
right,
main guy. I guess
right.
Jelani Woods is like a 6'9" project, but like he's more of a red zone threat than anything. He doesn't really move well out in space, and I guess his frame allows him to block sufficiently, but he doesn't really move me there either.
They don't have Mo Alley Cox, I don't think, anymore either. So it's
No,
like
no.
there's literally nobody. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
they might have to pull somebody off the sidelines out of retirement or something. Get Kyle Rudolph to pad back up and see what happens. But
Seriously, yeah, exactly. No, so we're keeping it in the AFC South here, going with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I still think secondary is definitely a need for them, so I'll let you talk about that when we get to them ultimately for your position for them. They did sign, what's his name? Who did they just recently sign?
Jordan Lewis, or are you
Yeah,
talking
Jordan
about?
Lewis. Yeah, no, Jordan Lewis. That's who I like. That was actually one of my favorite moves. I like that for them at the nickel spot. I definitely think corner is still a massive need for them as well. Safety definitely massive need, as you're going to touch on here. So I won't go there quite yet. But you got your edge rusher duo there with Trayvon Walker and then Josh Hines Allen. You got your edge is kind of set. So for me, interior defensive line makes a lot of sense. Again, a deep interior defensive line draft class. They've talked about it before. The GM James Gladstone and Liam Cohen. They've talked about adding to the trenches, and so that's ultimately where I'm going to go for them. But I think secondary, again, I've talked about it a few different times, is a massive need for them too.
Yeah, secondary and more specifically safety. Your over top guys. Darnell Savage, former Packer, and then not Jerry and Jones. Excuse me, Eric Murray.
Eric Murray. Yep.
I believe former Cowboy. So, or maybe not. Maybe that's a
I think
lie.
it was on the Texans,
Who
maybe.
is there was like Murray that played, not DeMarco Murray obviously, but there's a Murray in the secondary that played for the Cowboys. But regardless, yeah, the safety position is bad. I mean, I'm not really thrilled with either of those guys. Let's get some more help. If they were picking later in the first round, I would say like Malachi Starks, or maybe even later in the draft. Like you can get some of these day two safeties, day three safeties to plug. But yeah, interior D line is also a massive need. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Kansas City Chiefs, another place where this was like pretty clearly the spot that we needed. I'll say it again: protect your asset. So let's go ahead and get Patrick Mahomes some help there.
Yeah, I think we talked about it pretty extensively in our last mock draft video, but it's weird that a team this good has such a gaping need because we talked about like the Bills and the Ravens, these teams that are in contention that don't really have a ton of like glaring needs, whereas the Chiefs obviously are very much in that conversation, yet they've got a massive need. So another position group that I think they're going to have to attack multiple times in the draft. Sorry for that. Remy choked on some a toy there for a second. But yeah, no. So I think offensive line definitely needs to be addressed for them a few different ways.
Yeah, Remy was disgusted by how bad the offensive line is, so she couldn't help but choke and gag on her own words.
That's exactly right. She's okay now though, so she's alive and well. Yeah.
Yeah, Las Vegas Raiders. I went running back here. This is definitely Genty has been a hot name here, especially in the past week. Before it was
Yeah.
Chicago, and now it's like, hey, Genty in the first. So we'll see what happens. They're definitely an interesting spot, but I think running back is a massive need. Obviously, like they have off the top of my head. What's his face? Zamir White. This is supposed to be his breakout year. It didn't
Yeah, they've
happen.
got him.
They brought
Raheem,
in
Mostert. They just signed.
Raheem Mostert, Alexander Madison. I don't know if he's still there.
No,
Or
he's
no,
not.
Okay, yeah. So nobody good is basically what we've discovered. Zamir
Yeah.
White, like I said, was supposed to be the guy. It didn't work out, so now they got to pivot.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I think that makes a ton of sense. You've got no juice really there. I'm going to go with receiver ultimately, though. I don't know if you do, but I've liked Jacoby Myers as a wide receiver 2 or 3 for a while. So I like that. But aside from Jacoby Myers, they don't have anybody at receiver that I'm super fond of myself. Obviously, they had Devontae Adams last year, no longer there. So I think definitely get some speed at the receiver room for them. Another playmaker. You've got Brock Bowers. Obviously, you could kind of pair, a young receiver with too. So I think ultimately juice the offense a little bit with a playmaker. Kind of been the theme for a lot of these teams that we picked wide receiver and running back respectively for. Just needs some form of weapon. So I think you couldn't go wrong either way. And that's definitely the case for the Raiders too.
Yeah, and I was with you on the receivers, and then I kind of thought to myself like, I mean, Jacoby Myers is somebody who definitely crossed my mind. Like I know actually Josh Jacobs last week was on a live stream singing Jacoby Myers praises, which obviously is not keeping you from drafting anybody, but really
Right.
strong and underrated receiver in the league. And then I kind of clumped Brock Bowers in that like receiving threat. So I kind of
Sure.
just called it one. But if we're talking about actual wide receiver, yeah, it's certainly a need. And then speaking of teams that need wide receivers, I went wide receiver tight end here because this is definitely I feel like a really strong if like Tyler Warren does seem like somebody who would fit really well here. Although if they had the option, they would definitely go Loveland due to the Harbaugh connection. But somebody who has some versatility in the run game, which kind of complements their philosophies as a team, but can also stretch the field vertically and maybe make Justin Herbert have some more options, I think would be really good. So I went wide receiver and tight end. Just pass catcher for me is needed here.
Yeah, I could see tight end for sure. I'm ultimately leaning receiver more than tight end personally. You've got, obviously Quentin Johnson, who neither one of us are super fond of. Obviously, Lad McConkey was a hit in the second round for them last year. So I think we add another playmaker with Lad McConkey, and that's starting to become a formidable receiver room. I'm not moved by them re-signing, I should say, Mike Williams, kind of a reunion there. I don't think that really does anything for you. So would definitely like to see them add, maybe a bigger body receiver who can kind of take over Mike Williams' role potentially to pair with Lad McConkey in that system. I think would make a sense. Somebody who can run block obviously would be important for them too, with the way that they have their offensive scheme set up. I liked the Najee Harris signing we talked about before, so running back could have been in contention, but I actually like that move. So, other than that, I think again that's pretty much it's been one of the bigger needs for them for a while. I think that's still their biggest need probably at this point.
Yeah, it's been a need for them for multiple years. Ever since the departure of Keenan Allen, even when they had Keenan Allen, it feels like receiver was always a need.
Yeah.
And ultimately for the Rams, who went corner. You want to start in this one?
Yeah, so for the Rams, obviously they've been building up their defense for a little bit. Les Snead, their GM, was talking about how it took him a few years to kind of replace Aaron Donald, like by himself in that front seven. It took like 4 or 5 draft top 100 picks to kind of replace a little bit of what he meant to them. So they've obviously been building out their front seven for a while now. I think really in that defense, the only thing you really need to address is corner at this point. Maybe safety too, but Cam Curl was okay for you. And again, I think ultimately I would lean a little bit more towards corner for them. Other than that, again, their front seven is awesome. I don't think you need to go receiver. I love Puka Nakua. I love Devontae Adams. Tutu Atwell is fine, slot receiver for you as well. Offensive line, maybe for them too. I think maybe you could address that potentially, but I'm okay with where they're at there. Obviously, don't really need running back either with Kyron Williams. So, and they drafted Blake Corum last year too. So, yeah, for me, I think corner is really the only spot, especially on defense, that you're really needing some extra help in particular.
Yeah, and a couple things. The front seven, as you mentioned, is awesome. This is like one of my favorite front sevens in the whole NFL, particularly the defensive line.
Oh yeah,
Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, who was obviously, I don't have to speak on how high I was on him. Byron Young, Kobe Turner, and Puna Ford are all like very strong defensive line options. So super good unit there. I kind of consider tight end here. I'm not going to lie. This is like as much as they use Tyler Higbee, and maybe he's like just the McVay guy, like he loves him some Higbee. Like I feel like if you got another as involved as someone like Tyler Higbee is, I feel like that could be an upgrade, and it could do wonders for the offense moving forward. But again, we went with biggest need here, which ultimately led me to say corner.
Yeah.
Darius Williams and then Akello Witherspoon are not enough to make me not want to make improvements here.
I think you make a good call with tight end. I didn't really think about that, but I think it was rumored last year, if I remember correctly, that they were trying to move up for Brock Bowers, which, again, maybe it's just how good of a prospect he was in general, but I think that would be really fun pairing a good dynamic tight end with Sean McVay. I think that would be pretty sick. Yeah.
Yeah, for my fantasy enjoyers out there, this seems like a destination that would draft like a day 2 tight end, like just bear with me for a second. Like, what if they went like
Don't say it.
Harold Fannin in the second, and then all of a sudden, God forbid, Tyler Higbee goes down. Harold Fannin is like eating in a McVay offense. Like, only
We could
McVay
talk
could
about
figure out how to use him.
We could talk about Harold Fenton Jr. for a while. I think a lot of people like him, but I don't know how you feel about him, but I don't like him personally. I would definitely not take him anywhere close to the second round. I know he's got the production, but maybe we'll save that for another conversation. But that's my opinion. But either way, the point stands.
He's got some mud in his cleats sometimes and doesn't really know how to move laterally, but he's obviously got phenomenal hands and the production was out the ass. So, but no, I think that more it was more of like a tight end in a McVay offense.
No, maybe
they
like a
could
Mason
figure it out.
Taylor or like potentially like a
That's a
Gunnar
great
Helm or
one.
something.
Yeah, that's a great one. I actually really like Clemson's tight end. I can't remember his name now.
Oh, I don't know his name. Or Elijah Arroyo, maybe.
He's got the Elijah Arroyo. You know we like some. That's the top 50 player for us. So we both like us some Elijah Arroyo.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name now. Bridgington. That's not his name, but it's something along those lines.
Bridgestool or something.
Bridgestool.
Right?
Jake Brimmingstool.
Drake Birmingstool.
Yes,
Yeah.
really good movement abilities. We're getting so sidetracked, so we're gonna move on.
We
But
are.
Jake Brimmingstool is someone I really liked and is like a good receiving option. But
Yeah.
moving on, offensive line. We talked about some poor units, and we've touched on offensive line a few times. This is a team that needs offensive line. Their identity is in the McDaniel offense is running the football, and outside of Teron Armstead, I don't know if there's anybody there. Teron Armstead also 37 million years old.
Right.
We need some people movers in the interior there, and tackle wouldn't be a bad option either.
I was going to say, I think specifically if I had to specify here, I would say interior offensive line. Aaron Brewer, former Titan, not a good player. James Daniels was a guy they signed from Pittsburgh, also not a great player. I think interior offensive line would be big for them. Obviously Teron Armstead, and then I think Austin Jackson's fine at right tackle, so could look to improve that, but I think interior O-line makes the most sense for them, for sure.
Yeah, so we don't need to beat a dead horse there.
Yeah.
Graham, you got it.
Yeah, for me, again, another team that I think you guys, in particular, the Vikings, could go best player available at most of their draft picks, which are few and far between for you guys this year
Right.
at this point. But for me, based on all the moves they made in free agency, I think that interior D line could make a lot of sense for you. Harrison Phillips is still there, right? So he's an older guy.
Yeah.
Javon Hargrave's in there for sure. Is a guy that you guys just signed from San Francisco, another older guy as well. So I think, again, just due to the deep class, I think interior D-line would make the most sense. Obviously, your edge is pretty well set for the most part, but could go there too. But that's kind of my thinking so far. I think corner makes a ton of sense too, though.
Yeah, and I like what you said about Harrison Phillips specifically. Someone who might be a cap casualty, who might be getting the cut next year. Also an aging player. So if there's a solid zero technique head up guy in a 3-4 defense who falls to 24, maybe this is your. I'm blanking on Michigan D tackle now. Not
Kenneth
Mason
Grant,
Graham,
or-
Kenneth Grant. Yeah, Kenneth Grant. This could be a Kenneth Grant spot, and I would be over the moon. But I can't help but ignore that the Vikings have been missing. I watched Xavier Rhodes in his prime against Odell.
Rhodes closed.
Rhodes closed, baby. That's like one of my favorite players of all time. But anyways, ever since his absence, we've been searching for a lockdown CB1, and we haven't been able to find it, despite multiple attempts. So I would love to see them fill that need, and I think ultimately it is the biggest need is just perimeter corner, boundary corner, whatever you want to call it. Is certainly a need.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Patriots, another easy one. Actually, there are a few spots, so maybe I shouldn't say too easy. I think receiver definitely is an honorable mention here. I don't love the Stephon Diggs contract and that move in general. That was a little bit of a desperation, I feel like, at this point. So I think receiver. It was weird because I liked Javon Baker and Jalen Polk a lot last year. They just didn't really perform at all. They were both pretty bad, honestly. Or Javon Baker didn't get much burn. Jalen Polk looked really bad. So I was really surprised by that one. He was actually one of my favorite receivers in last year's class. Kind of an underrated guy for me. So a little disappointing there. So I think receiver definitely would make sense. Running back could make sense. I know we floated the idea maybe of Ashton Genty at 4 for them potentially. But I think ultimately offensive line would make the most sense. Let's protect your assets, as you've alluded to a few times. You got Drake May back there. You got to improve your offensive line. That takes precedent over anything else, I think, at this point for them.
And I don't want to get sidetracked too much again, but gosh, now that I'm thinking of Vrabel with Derrick Henry, like, does he go out and get his next Derrick Henry, like with Genty? Like,
yeah.
Now that you've planted the seed in my head, I can't help ignore it. But
It's
yeah,
a fun idea.
it's such a fun idea, and it would be super fun on that team specifically. But yeah, offensive line, protect the asset. I'm not beating a dead horse, but I am protect the asset. So offensive line, and then I'll let you start because I literally said ditto on this one.
Yeah, I was gonna say sorry to do this to our Saints fans, but I think there's just way too much that they need. I think you can make an argument for pretty much any spot on the roster, for being honest. I mean, I don't know if any spot is safe. Linebacker, corner, offensive line, receiver, running back, quarterback. I mean, I think you could make a case for really anything and everything. So for me, I mean, if I had to pick like a number one, oh man, I would probably say edge rusher, to be honest with you, just defensive line. But I think, again, you can make a case for pretty much anywhere on that team at this point. This might be a bottom 3 team next year, which I don't know. It's hard to call that now, but and we're usually not that great at, people in general are not that great at calling, like predicting records before the season anyways. But I think this is shaping up to not be a great team next year for sure.
Yeah, I mean, as far as teams looking to pick number one next year, I think Saints could very well be the top of that list, along with the Giants and maybe some other teams. But yeah, I literally just said ditto here. They could really use everything. If I had to pick one, I mean, it's hard because I don't really know how they value receiver, or I know how I value receiver.
Right.
Chris Olave's health you can't necessarily trust. I don't know if I love any of the other weapons they have. But yeah, I mean, you couldn't go wrong closing your eyes on draft night and taking the top guy on your big board. So
I agree.
that's kind of where I stand on that. And then New York Giants, I went offensive line. They have arguably, maybe them and the Jets have, I don't want to say the Jets, maybe the Giants have the worst offensive line unit in the NFL. It's up there for sure. I guess Texans are giving them a run for their money now.
I don't know if it's that bad. I think it's not good, certainly, but I don't know if it's that bad. I might disagree with you slightly on that one, but it's still not
dude.
good.
I don't know. I mean, I just know how it worked out with I can't remember his name again, the right guard from Bama who they just drafted, or the right tackle, I guess, Evan Neal. I know how it worked out with Evan Neal.
Yeah.
Like, left tackle is the Andrew Thomas is like the only relatively bright spot. He's a diamond and everybody else is bottom of the shoe gunk. So I don't.
That's fair.
It is a bad offensive line, and I don't really see anything happening. That's kind of like my philosophy, anyways. As a GM, I know we've kind of mentioned that as well. Is like building up offensive line first, and then kind of moving outward from the trenches. It's kind of like my personal philosophy and how I think team building should be. Which it sounds like you probably agree.
Yeah, it's interesting because, sorry, Remy's squeaking here. It's interesting because I saw Brian Schottenheimer, the Cowboys coach, talk about the opposite philosophy, building your team from the outside in. And he was talking about how you win on the edges. So he's talking about like corners, edge rushers, tackles. So it's kind of weird to hear an NFL coach have a different philosophy than what we're describing, but maybe we'll see how that works out for them. But going with the Giants specifically, though, for me, I put quarterback because although at this point I wouldn't say it's like the most glaring need from like this year's standpoint, because you do have Russell Wilson, you got Jameis Winston, who again, those guys aren't going to save Dable and Shane's jobs respectively. But I think a huge priority for them needs to be finding a franchise quarterback going forward. So whether that be at the top of the draft or later in the draft, who knows where that comes into play. But I think this is not a franchise that can punt or at least from Dable and Joe Shane's standpoint, they can't afford to punt on a quarterback. Maybe from an organizational standpoint, it would make the most sense to do that. But for them, I think it makes the most sense to find a quarterback at some point that you can always use as your, final Hail Mary attempt to kind of save your job once, Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston, underperforms during the year. You can maybe say, hey, at least we found a rookie quarterback and maybe he goes in and does something special. So that's kind of where my thinking landed on that one.
Yeah, and real quick, you know what, I'm gonna disagree with the public here, and I think the Giants, as far as handling the number 3 pick at this point on April 2nd, that is, maybe they shit the bed later in the month, but at the moment, I think they've handled the quarterback situation and how they're approaching the draft, at least from the moves they made in free agency. I think they've handled it super well on the offensive side of the ball. I've never been someone who's thought Shador should be worth the number 3 pick, and obviously the Giants are not going that way because of the moves they've made. Obviously, Russ and Jameis aren't keeping you from doing that, but I think those moves are showing their hand a little bit like, hey, we're not.
It's not
feeling
desperation anymore where they have to take the guy at number 3.
I think even with Shador there, I think you're like the value doesn't match, and I think that that's the right move by the Giants. And I think when they get Travis Hunter on draft night, that it will be the right move. So I think they've actually handled the situation well, but that's a little bit besides the point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you talked about it off camera, but it seems like the Jets keep trying to improve their offensive line with like these Band-Aid solutions, but I think ultimately you got to keep drafting these guys high, ultimately. Olu Fashanu looked really good when he came into play late in the year. I think we just need to keep improving their offensive line. For me, it's pretty straightforward for the Jets at this point. I think receiver makes sense too, though, so I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, and I don't really have too much to add other than you have Garrett Wilson and who else? That's it. So, Garrett Wilson and is not enough. I love the idea of pairing him and Justin Fields again. I actually think Justin Fields in New York might work quite well, but I guess we'll see. Regardless, I think tight end could be an option here. But receiver, tight end, pass catcher is an overall need, so we won't belabor that too much. And then Philadelphia Eagles. This one also is pretty easy. And I know I used this exact phrase last time. They're a revolving door when it comes to their edge. I feel like every year they bring in new edges, they do well, and then they go somewhere else and get paid. So I don't find that being any different from what they're going to do moving forward. They're probably going to draft a great edge. He's going to do well. They'll keep him for 4 years, and then someone else will pay him big money.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Again, a team that probably has the most complete roster in the entire NFL. I don't think they really have a position of need really anywhere except for maybe edge. So I think this is actually maybe the easiest one to pick, in my opinion, out of the whole list we've gone through so far.
Yeah, that's a good point. Pittsburgh, I'll let you start.
Yeah, I think D-line, obviously, it's a sneaky D-line team. I mentioned that in one of our mock draft videos. I think it's a team that many people are talking about as a D-line pick for them at number 21 in the draft. I think it definitely could be D-line for them. They've done some homework on Derek Harmon out of Oregon. They've done some work on Kenneth Grant as well out of Michigan. I think D-line actually would be kind of a sneaky need for them going forward. So that's ultimately why I went with D-line for them at this point. You got some aging vets on the D-line. So let's, again, deep class, all the stuff we talked about before.
Yeah, and we got some comments, which we appreciate, on our one of our more recent videos for the mock draft talking about D-line. So go check that out if you haven't seen it. But I went quarterback here. I wanted to limit my quarterback selection to just one team. I didn't want to throw out quarterback for 6 different teams, although that could be very well be a need for multiple teams. So I picked my quarterback destination as the Pittsburgh Steelers. With what they have done on their perimeter, which I don't necessarily love, DK or George Pickens, I think that it's sufficient and covers the position fairly well. Offensive line could be an upgrade. Defensive line certainly could be an upgrade. But with how they are coached and their ability to win games despite having bad quarterback play, I feel like if they do have a quarterback, like that'll just make them that much better despite playing in a tough division and, having lackluster production at that position for multiple years now.
And there may be some people saying, well, what about Aaron Rodgers? What if he goes there? I think this is still as much of a need for them to address in the draft because I think there's been some reports about them liking Jalen Milroe a lot. You're not playing Jalen Milroe for 1 or 2 years at least anyways. And so, get somebody like that in the building who can get you over the hump for the Steelers being that 9-8, like kind of where they skate into the playoffs or just miss the cut every year. Mike Tomlin just going above 500 each year. Like, I think quarterback would make a ton of sense for them to be able to try to get over that hump. I think you're on the money with that one for sure.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And then San Francisco, I had some thoughts here that I quickly wanted to share. I think that at their Fred Warner is someone that I think of at his very best. Fred Warner feeds off the energy, and the defense feeds off the energy of Dre Greenlaw. Dre Greenlaw post Achilles hasn't been the same player in limited snaps. I think if you get a linebacker like someone who I'm super high on, and gosh dang it, Graham, who I can't remember any of his name, dude. Jihad Campbell.
Jihad Campbell, yes,
Yeah, if you plug
Alabama.
like
Yeah.
if you plug like a Jihad Campbell, someone who plays with their hair on fire, similar to like a Dre Greenlaw, I think that, or sorry, next to who plays similar to someone like Dre Greenlaw, pair him next to someone like Fred Warner, that would elevate the entire team. So there might be better needs somewhere else, but I think if you find that right pairing at linebacker and you pair up Fred Warner and Jihad Campbell in this example, the whole defense becomes elevated. So that's the reason why I went with linebacker for this spot, as opposed to maybe a team or a position that needs more help on the depth chart like a DB.
I like that. Another guy, maybe potentially Carson Schlesinger, a guy that I've talked about previously. Maybe he stays in that,
100%.
southern or not southern, but California area and stays local potentially. That could be an interesting spot too. Yeah, for me, corner. Again, I'm not going to belabor the point too much. There's just really nobody in their secondary really at this point that moves me too much. They lost Javarius Ward. They lost Hufunga, their safety, to free agency as well. So for me, secondary overall would be a place they can make some massive improvement for sure.
I think Renardo Green has been fairly decent for them. It's just I don't know if it's enough. I
Right.
think that they just need more, and I feel like they have their archetype of guys they like, and it seems like they always draft super well, getting guys later to fit their system. So the DB definitely a need for them. Seattle, we both agreed here. I just went interior in general. This is a team. Gosh, it seems now that I'm looking at it, dude, it feels like these teams like can't get these positions right. And Seattle has not had a good offensive line literally since the Russell Wilson days. So like, I I don't understand it. Like in my brain, it doesn't compute. So interior offensive line is my pick.
Yeah, you've got Abraham Lucas on the right side. You got Charles Cross on the left side. Those were obviously two pretty solid picks for them. But yeah, guard specifically or just interior offensive line, that was kind of their Achilles heel on their offensive line last year. So I think, again, would make a ton of sense to address that in the draft, especially with Sam Darnold coming into the building, a guy that doesn't deal with pressure from the interior particularly well. And you can maybe speak to that a little bit as well. But, something I think you definitely need to improve throughout the draft for them this year.
Yeah, we don't need to belabor it too much. And then we agreed here again with pass rush, or at least that's kind of where I was coming from. I think you have Yaya Diaby and maybe some other rotational pieces, but nothing really to move me.
Yeah, they signed Hassan Reddick too, so who
Right.
knows how he ends up being on that 1 year deal they signed him for. Obviously, he didn't play at all for the Jets last year, and kind of that weird situation that he had going on there, the contract dispute or whatever was happening. So maybe he's still got some juice there. Maybe he can bring it back to the Eagles and Panthers days and wreak some havoc there. But I think another edge rusher would make a ton of sense for them. Joe Tryon Schoen, or however you say that, Joe Tryon didn't really work out for them super well either. So I think, again, you try to swing the bat again towards an edge rusher, I think would make a ton of sense. And another spot in the first round, I think you could definitely take one at 19 or wherever they're picking.
Yeah, they went interior defensive line with Kalijah Cansey, and Vita Vea is obviously still there, so maybe even getting some edge will help them out. But Tennessee Titans, I'll start on this one and let you finish since this is your team. Obviously, edge and receiver are the top two needs for the Titans.
Yeah.
Just looking at the receiving room, like, gosh, especially given that Cam Ward's going to be the guy on day one, or in the first round, day one of the draft, I should say. Let's get him some assistance. I mean, we can't trot out the same Calvin Ridley and co. That we had last year, and even since then, it's been a decline. Getting rid of someone who had multiple. I know you weren't the highest on Westbrook Akine, but someone who at least was a solid spot starter in his production. Maybe a decent. I'll say decent wide receiver 3, wide
Right.
receiver 4 maybe. But yeah, let's get some receiver help.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the NWI Westbrook Akine point that you make there. He was at least reliable, if nothing else.
Yeah.
And he did provide some production. He had like 9 touchdowns last year. So, yeah, I mean, other than that, Traylon Burks has been horrible for the Titans. I would be totally fine if they cut him at this point. So, nothing there. Bryce Oliver is a guy that was an undrafted guy for them last year who I actually like a lot. Young guy who I think could make an impact potentially. But aside from him and Calvin Ridley, nothing really you're that excited about. There was a seventh rounder 2 years ago, Colton Dowell, who I think maybe has some potential, but we got to add some juice to their receiver core. I think that's a major need for them. Van Jefferson is a not great signing, so, again, got to go receiver for sure. For me, it was definitely between receiver and edge. Obviously, quarterback is somewhat of a need too, or not somewhat, it is a need for sure. But, I think ultimately edge and receiver are the two biggest needs. Particularly edge, for me, you do at least have Calvin Ridley at receiver. I leaned edge because you really don't have anybody who can really rush the passer. Again, another team that was very low in total sacks last year. And again, watching that defense was just brutal when you see Joe Burrow and Drake May running around back there and doesn't get sacked after 10 seconds in the pocket. So definitely need to improve that unit there. They signed Jermont Jones from Seattle. Again, maybe like a third or fourth rotational edge rusher. You've got Arden Key, who's older and played a little bit better last year than the year prior to. But again, you got to add some more juice in there. There are a couple young guys that I think are interesting, but we got to add some edge rushers. And I think they're going to look to probably double dip in the draft at edge and receiver both. So definitely the two biggest needs in my opinion for sure.
Yeah, I could see that being an option. Commanders
Final,
here.
Yeah, final team here. Why don't you
Is
go
the
ahead?
final team. Yeah, Washington Commanders. I decided to go corner, and while I'm kind of talking here, let me pull up their team just to make sure I'm speaking right. I know earlier when I was looking at their squad, the way they're built is so interesting to me. It is literally like everyone on their team is either young or old. Like there's no in between of like let's get some 26-year-olds. Like everyone on their team is either 22 with a baby face or got a foot in the grave as far as NFL length goes or NFL time goes. I think anywhere on defense could be an option. I mean, I'm not in love with their defensive tackle spot. Deron Payne obviously
too,
fine.
maybe.
Linebacker is really bad. I mean, this is year 77 of Bobby Wagner, and then which people are still convinced he's like this unreplaceable guy at this point in his career.
Madden
Like,
rating.
yeah, exactly. They see 90 plus X factor in Madden, and they're like, we can't replace him. He's 37 years old, but we can't replace him. No, linebacker's a huge need, but I ultimately went corner. Jonathan Jones and Marshawn Lattimore. We just need help in the secondary. I like Mikey Sanders still from Michigan last year, but that's more of your nickel guy. This was more your boundary, your field corner that I went with.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair take you have there as well. For me, edge rusher, really D-line would make the most sense. I did not like the Javon Kinlaw signing, but they did pay him big money, so ultimately went with edge for them. You've got Cleveland Farrell as one of your starters, it looks like, at least what I'm looking at on the roster here for them. You got to add some pass rush juice, and again, arguably the third most important position behind offensive line and quarterback. So, let's add some juice to the edge rushing department for them. Again, try to keep sustaining the hype that they had last year. I don't think they probably reach those heights again, just inevitably how that kind of works out. But let's maximize Jaden Daniels' potential and get some juice in the edge rushing department for them. So that's pretty much my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I think they've got a good baseline for moving forward. Like I like what Washington did this past year. Although on paper I did not expect them to do anything, which obviously nobody did. I think they've got a good baseline for the future, and getting a solid edge player, getting a solid corner would help them tremendously. But yeah, that's pretty much all we got. You got any closing remarks?
No, pretty much it. Thanks for sticking with us here, guys, going through everybody's teams to talk about the biggest draft needs. If we missed anything or if you disagree with any of our takes, feel free to let us know in the comments. But appreciate your engagement and watching as always. We'll see you in our next video.
Till next time.
See you guys.